Rival rallies mark the anniversary of the 2011 uprising in Egypt, reflecting the deep divisions that still exist after a revolt that raised hopes of political reform. 3 years later, is this the anniversary that Egyptians had hoped for? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. Dozens of protesters have been killed and hundreds arrested as Egypt marks the third anniversary of the 2011 uprising, a popular revolt that overthrew longtime leader Hosni Mubarak. The calls back then appeared simple: for bread, freedom, social justice and human dignity. So 3 years later, how much of that has been achieved? Gatherings to mark the uprising painted starkly contrasting scenes. Thousands turned out for state-backed rallies in Cairo's Tahrir Square, celebrating the overthrow of Hosni Mubarak and the removal of elected leader Mohamed Morsi, who was deposed by a military coup in July last year. At the same time, security forces moved in on demonstrations in support of Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, a movement which remains strong in the face of arrests and detention. Many leaders of the Brotherhood have been jailed. Security forces also shut down rallies by secular activists who led the 2011 anti-Mubarak uprising, but are critical now of both sides. Plenty then to talk about with my guests today, who are with me here in the studio: Naomi Ramirez Diaz, a researcher at Autonoma University in Madrid, who specialises in political Islam. Also here in Doha, Zakariyya Abdel-Hady, Associate Professor of Islamic Thought and Culture at Qatar University, who studies Egyptian politics. And in our studio in London, we're joined by Omar Ashour, a Senior Lecturer at the University of Exeter's Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies, and author of, among other things, the De-Radicalisation of Jihadists, Transforming Islamist Movements. Zakariyya Abdel-Hady, if we can come to you first. What's happened to the revolution? Has it been stolen? What about so-called ordinary Egyptians, those with no strong religious or political affiliations? I mean, are they in the majority in Egypt? Do they still have a voice? How do they feel about the revolution and their future?
It's totally clear. There are a group who are for the coup and who are supported heavily by the Mubarak regime and their allies, and all the same figures that were in Mubarak regime. They're coming out now on TV. They're speaking the same thing. They are even supporting the current so-called constitution. While on the other side, we now realize that the spectrum have grown up so heavily. Not only the Islamists. Now we have seen people from 6th of April. We have seen the groups, socialists. Yeah. They're all joining yesterday, and they were dying. So, some of them were killed.
So very briefly, is the revolution on track, or has it been stolen?
No, I believe of course it was stolen, but now the revolutionists will take it back, and the way that they are standing in the street and giving their blood and giving their lives for their freedom. This is really a historical moment that we are witnessing in Egypt. People are being told that we are going to shoot you. There have been people who are protected and given gifts and presents in a Tahrir Square and dancing and everything wonderful there. And on the other side, you just walk 2 streets behind, you find people are shot dead immediately, but they are still coming in the street. They're still believing that they have the right for their freedom.
All right. Now, one thing I'm sure that most people will agree on in Egypt is that the political picture there is a complex one. As we've been hearing, the army is calling the shots right now, led by General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. The military governed Egypt after the fall of Mubarak and then removed Mohamed Morsi from power after the 2011 elections. The Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1928, but has been banned for much of its history. Its political wing, the Freedom and Justice Party, won the most seats in the 2011 election. But it was reclassified as a terrorist group by authorities in December. Then there's the April 6th movement, young activists who helped mobilize protests in 2011. They allied themselves with the Tamarod, or the rebellion, calling for President Morsi to resign, but then boycotted this month's constitutional referendum. And it's worth mentioning the Nour party, seen as ultra-conservative and aligned to the Salafist movement. It ran second to the Freedom and Justice Party in the 2011 poll, but has since distanced itself from the Muslim Brotherhood. It's now backing the new constitution. Zakariyya Abdel-Hady, we don't tend to use the term Islamist on Al Jazeera because it's far too general a term. Where does the Nour party sit on that spectrum? How does its ideology, its political aspirations differ from the now outlawed Muslim Brotherhood?
To be specific about the term on terminology of Salafist, as the Salafist as terminology, it comes as a source of people who follow the Salaf, follow the predecessor of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the first generation, the companions in the first generation, and the third generation. So those are called the Salaf. So initially it was a group of people who believe that they should be the followers of those predecessors, which in practical, it's all Muslim who should be following the footsteps of the Prophet. The Nour party, if you would like to look at the political scenario of the Nour party, it's quite far from the Salafi movement in Egypt. The Salafi movement is wide spectrum. It have different faction within it who believe in different things. We realize that the Nour party have lost a lot of credibility as a Salafi group because they have left a lot of this essence that they were calling before the removal of Mubarak, for example. They were against revolution. They were against people coming in the streets. They were against opposing presidents. They were saying that, okay, we have to follow the president, whatever, and so on. They were even against standing in election. When the Muslim Brotherhood with their campaigns were standing in election, even in syndicates, in student unions and so on, they were against it. And they were saying that you, by participating in a kufr or non-believers constitution, non-believer elections, you are committing a crime or committing something illegal. There was a huge shift in that understanding and methodology to the level that they participated. Not only they participated, they start challenging different Islamic groups to take part in that after the revolution. So what I'm trying to say is that they have left a lot of their essence that they were calling for from the beginning.
The Salafist roots they've left behind. It is the Nour party we will concentrate on in this first part of the discussion here. Naomi, the Nour party may have left its Salafist roots to a certain extent behind. Salafis may want Egypt to become a pure Islamic society governed by Islamic or Sharia law. That's not necessarily what the Nour party wants, is it?
First of all, I think that when we are speaking about the Salafis, we have to make sure that this concept is very, very, very wide. So they could be called Salafis, as any other could be called Salafi, as the previous guest was saying, Zakariyya was saying. Anyone who follows the Salaf could be called a Salafi. Now, regarding what they ask for, well, since in the beginning they were against the demonstrations and against taking part in the government, and in fact, they could be sort of a threat to other Salafi groups who are still calling for those things. Like, for example, the Salafists from the very beginning were calling against not going against their governor or participating in democratic elections or kufr, as Zakariyya was saying. This group is doing totally the opposite. It is the first group that we see as Salafis entering a government, first with the Muslim Brotherhood and now allying to some extent with the military. So what they are calling for right now is something very malleable, and right now I couldn't say what they are exactly calling for. I have to say that.
All right, let's bring in Omar Ashour in London then. How does the Nour party keep a foothold in the political process in Egypt without losing credibility among its supporter base? It's come in for fierce criticism for backing the army's removal of President Morsi, hasn't it?
It is, and I think it did lose quite significant percentage of its support, even among some of the high-ranking leaders, not only in the Nour party, but also in the Dawah Salafiyya, the Salafi Call, which is the mother organization of the Nour party. If you saw the sit-in Rabaa Square in August, last August and last July, Many of the leading figures in the Dawah Salafiyya and members of the Nour party were just not only among the protesters but also on the stage condemning what's happening. So I think you have the upper tier of the Nour party is, or part of the upper tier is with the coup, with the General Sisi supporting it and giving it support fatwas and so on. But significant percentage of the leadership, of the mid-ranks and of the grassroots are on the other side demonstrating against it. The Nour party fits Salafis, the term Salafi, you cannot predict political behavior from it, because Salafi organizations are so different in terms of political behavior, in terms even sometimes in ideology as well. Salafism is a set of often conflicting political ideologies, and the organizational structures as well differ. The Nour party belongs to a category of Salafism that you can call it Salafi, authoritarian Salafism or authorities Salafism, which support the state regardless of where regardless of who controls the state and how did he get to control the state. They have this fatwas coming from the mid-centuries about the legitimacy of the victorious, Imarat al-Mutaghallib, which basically means whoever is victorious in controlling the state by bloodshed, by whatever then you give him the legitimacy and you give him the loyalty. And it's one of 5 main categories of Salafism. You have the political Salafis who more or less participate in the elections, participate as political parties. You have them in the feast back in the days in Algeria, the Reform Front now in Tunisia, the Ummah Wasat, the Central Ummah, Central Nation in Libya. You have in Egypt, you have the Asala Party and the Islamic group. All those belong to the political category of Salafism, which vie in elections and so on. You have the ones who, the armed Salafis, the groups that take up arms against the state. You have as well the missionary Salafism, which is less political and more concerned with the teachings of the first 3 generations of Islam, studying these teachings and propagating them. And then you have the Nour party's category, which is the authorities Salafism, which is very strong as well in places like Saudi Arabia and others.
Zakariyya, why did the Nour party back the new constitution in the recent referendum, which effectively stripped out Islamist provisions which the party had lobbied for when it helped to draft the previous constitution, which was suspended last year?
This is as I totally agree with your guest in London. This is something very confusing about the Nour party. Nour party from the beginning, they were said that they're supposed to be supporting the current government, which was elected President Morsi. But then we realized that they have switched it very quickly when they realized that the coup is coming on, and they just jumped in that boat and that ship, and they said, okay, we're with you to try to gain anything. And unfortunately, because they did that kind of behavior, they didn't gain anything. They were the way they were treated in the Constitution Committee, that 50 individual who have been appointed by al-Sisi and his regime, there was one member of Nour party there, and he couldn't open his mouth. And when even he opened his mouth to say something, they said, okay, we'll note it down, but it will not be done. So they were so much humiliated during that whole process. And I personally believe that they didn't make any gains. They were hoping that they could safeguard their Nour party, the political party. Now there are even calls within the secular side or within the coup authorities that even parties on Islamist party, or which Nour is supposed to be, should be banned altogether, like Hizb al-Hurriya wal-Adala, the Justice, Freedom and Justice Party of the Muslim Brotherhood. So they are not losing, they are not winning this way, they are not winning this way. There is some rumors that, but obviously as an academic, I don't believe in rumors, I believe in solid facts.
Like journalists.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. But there are a lot of rumors that, and probably that will support what your guest in London is saying, that some of those leaders or some of those people that were there, they were planted, they were put there to support the coup from the beginning, to gather all those Salafist movement from different backgrounds and from different sides, so that they can have a front for them, and then they will be moved and used as a coup want later on.
Okay, perhaps we're getting to the nub of it here. There's a certain irony, isn't there, that many people blamed the Salafists for pressuring the Muslim Brotherhood into instituting the Islamic-based legislation, which proved to be so unpopular with great swathes of the Egyptian population. And yet, here they are standing with the military-backed government, at least on the constitution, and eyeing perhaps a hand in power.
I don't like conspiracy theories because I think they never lead anywhere. But it's very interesting to connect this fact with the fact that some Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia, which is known for its support for Salafi groups, did not hesitate to give extra money to the military right after the coup. And we know that the model of the Muslim Brotherhood is something that Saudi Arabia doesn't like. So it's not too far from reality to think that there's some kind of connection between this support from Saudi Arabia to the coup and the fact that the Salafi leaders were in the same picture with al-Sisi and the Christian patriarch and everybody in the picture of the coup, like, we are going to give the power to the civilians and we will not be on the front, and then we will just use them, which is what has happened.
Omar, in London, to what extent should secular liberal Egyptians be more concerned about the Nour party and its aspirations than the Muslim Brotherhood? How much support do Salafis have in Egypt? What proportion of the population would describe themselves as Salafists, or at least support Salafist ideals?
Well, it's there is a significant portion in the Egyptian electorate that are swingers, that are swing voters. But if you looked at the parliamentary elections in 2011, 2012, the 7.5 million voted for the Salafi alliance. It was made out of the Nour party, which is, as we know, supports the coup, but made also out of the Asala Salafi party, which is against the coup, and made of the Islamic group as well. Those were the three major partners in this alliance. So they called it the Islamic Alliance, as opposed to the Democratic Alliance, which was the Muslim Brothers with other secular and non-Islamist groups. And those guys got 7.5 million. But also, if you looked later in the presidential elections, the Muslim Brothers got, or the Democratic Alliance got around 10 million. So the total was 17 million. Morsi, when he won the elections, got 13.2 million, which means that they lost 4 million in the process. I don't know what's their situation now, but the Nour party specifically, the leadership at least, if it runs in elections, I think they will not get that much support, if any, from the electorate that votes, or the segment of the electorate that votes Islamist, because they will be seen as more or less sellouts during this process. And obviously, the other dimension as well is they have no contributions in terms of they sold out the idea of the Islamic State. We're fighting for an Islamic constitution to the electorate. And that idea obviously failed. On the other side, the social services network that the Muslim Brothers have, you know, the charities, the free clinics, the education centers, all of this are not provided by them. So in terms of contributions to the electorate, not that much.
Okay, Zakariyya, I need a brief answer from you here, because I want to broaden the discussion out here. Is the Nour party going to field a candidate for the presidential election, or is it going to back al-Sisi here, or does it have its sight set more on the parliamentary elections rather than the presidency?
I think both of them. They will of course put all their effort on the parliamentary, if there were to be a parliamentary election. I personally, from analysing the whole situation, I don't think there will be going to be any parliamentary election. I think the Sisi will walk in and take over everything, which currently that's what is happening anyway. This is what we have heard. Adli Mansour, I think his name Adli Mansour or something like that, who's supposed to be president of interim president or what, something. He said that now they're changing the roadmap to make the presidential election in support of, of course, that will give the way to Sisi to come in. So a Nour party, they will say, and that's what I imagine they will do. They will say, okay, well, let's see who is the other candidates that will be standing, and then we can see who is the more closer to our Sharia and our things. But in the end of the day, they will support Sisi. This is what I believe they will do.
Okay. It's worth pointing out that Al Jazeera can't report from Egypt right now because our journalists there have been detained. Producers Mohammed Fahmy and Baha Mohammed and correspondent Peter Grester have been in custody since December 29th. They're accused of spreading lies harmful to state security and joining a terrorist group, allegations that Al Jazeera says are totally unfounded. Two other journalists from our sister channels are also being held. Abdullah Al-Shami is a reporter and Mohammed Bada is a cameraman. They've been detained now for over 5 months. Naomi, Al Jazeera's Peter Grester, as we say, is currently detained without charge in Egypt, has written from his prison cell that the Egyptian state seems to see itself in an existential struggle that pits the forces of good, open, free society against the Islamist, quote, terrorists, in inverted commas, who are still trying to seize control. Is he right?
I think is that, first of all, when we see the division in Egypt between two kinds of demonstrations, the one supporting the military or the current affairs, and the one supporting the return of Morsi, we cannot say that all these people are Islamists. I think these people are just supporting the democratically elected ex-president now. And when we divide the reality between the secularists or the army and allies and the Islamists, we are ourselves trying to divide the situation in Egypt so that we can understand it more easily. So I think any kind of Manichaean divisions between black and white, good and bad, good and evil, all these things are not helpful at all, because we used to think that all the Islamists would be on the same side, and now we see the Nour party on the other side. So I think it's not right to divide. That's all.
Omar, Peter goes on to say in his open letter that anyone who applauds the state is seen as safe and deserving of liberty, and anything else is a threat that needs to be crushed. The new constitution calls for freedom of the press. What are we to make of it then of a society where even secular activists and highly respected neutral journalists like Peter can be imprisoned, accused of undermining the state? What does this tell us about where Egypt is headed now?
It's a classic post-coup environment. I think I wrote this in 7th of July in The Guardian and even on Jazeera online, that we have a very clear patterns of how coups operate when they oust an elected institution. A coup on a coup or a coup against a dictatorship, you do not see this kind of repressive environment. But a coup against an elected institution, you have a significant portion of the society that support this elected institution. But moreover, the coup did not come, they did not remove a democracy or a democratic process to install another democratic process. They remove a democratic process to install specific authorities, and they need to do so by fear and more or less to terrorize a significant part of the population, especially the activist part. So a different narrative from that of the authorities is unacceptable. And the different narrative can be from political opposition, but also will come out of neutral professional journalists and even neutral and professional academics. You see now the crack on academia. Many of the non-affiliated academics from various respectable universities, including most recently an academic like Dr. Ahmed Shaheen from the American University in Cairo, gets charged with espionage. So it's the whole environment here is not tolerating any different narrative from the authorities that was brought about by the coup. And if anyone dares to do that, he will be met either by prison, by live bullets, or by asking him to leave, to go on exile.
Zakariyya Abdel-Hady.
And that we saw that in Pinochet's Chile.
Yeah.
Sorry, last bit to put it in comparative perspective. We saw this in Franco's Spain in the 30s. We saw this in Iran's post-Mossadegh coup in '53. We saw this in Chile in 1973 after Pinochet's coup. We saw this in Brazil in '64. Yeah. So it's a very consistent pattern, you know, post-Algeria as well, 1992, and so on.
As always with Inside Story, just as we're getting going, it's time to end. I'm afraid the news waits for no man, and that's next. We'll have to end it there. Thank you to my guests, Naomi Ramirez Diaz, Zakariyya Abdel-Hady, and in London, Omar Ashour. And thank you for watching. A reminder, you can find this programme and many more at aljazeera.com. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finighan. We'll see you again on Inside Story. Bye for now.